to ask for help from anywhere else outside of the continent, which is a narrative that I think Africans and people from the third world certainly struggle with. The idea of always being a place for someone to demonstrate their charity. But it is through a post-colonial performance that we're able to rehumanize Mr. Lutaya, embody him, and indeed revise history to include him. I'd like to finish by mentioning a couple of points that the way that we are taught in third world countries, it almost implies that the only way we can access our historical archives is through the languages of the other. The only way we can access our history is through the literature, the performance, the art of the other. And it's very important for us to actually embrace our post-coloniality as something that it doesn't have to be a question of authenticity. We can have as much Britishness in our work as we want, as much Botswana-ness as we want, but as long as we're able to articulate what's ours before we're able to articulate what's been given to us. And I think in terms of theater, how that applies, especially with the looming linguicide that is so prevalent in many African countries, is that we need to privilege our own languages in our work as much as we privilege languages of others, even in our daily life. It is very disheartening to think that in a lot of these countries, to actually be fluent in English or French or whatever the colonial language was, is a status symbol. To say, look how well I can speak the colonizer's language, yet you cannot even speak well the language that is of your people. And by doing that, we're continuing the colonial project. We are putting ourselves back in a place that really goes back against what Kwame Nkrumah said, that there would be a new African in the world. We are not being that new African who can fight his own battles. We're being the African who is the dream African for the colonizer. As celebrated Nigerian author Ben Okri once said, the lives people live do over time take on a quality of art. And I think for all of us who are artists, we should want to give voice to those real life African stories that have taken a quality of art through their heroism, through the transcendence of what we thought was possible. And we should want to perform them in ways that mirror Africa herself, in ways that Africans can see themselves in themselves, and that there are indeed many ways of being African. And there are many, many people who we think of as, oh yeah, we know that they're important in our histories, but we don't know anything about them, like Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Sir Seretse Khama, people like that who were very instrumental in sort of laying the foundation for us so that we can enjoy this idea of, oh, I'm just going to up and go study in America. That is because of their sacrifices. I believe that African Renaissance will be ushered in through literature and the arts, but we need to prepare to be a part of that movement that restores memory and restores our heroes' dignity, restores our unique performances. For me, that is what a lot of our performance in Africa should do, apart from entertainment. It should be a carrier of memory. It must dig up forgotten stories and immortalize them in an intelligent and informed manner that also succeeds at the level of aesthetics. Thank you. I'll take questions if you guys have them. Oh, hi, yes.
I'm assuming the structure of your play is constant ever you ever modify.
Yes, what can you perform?
Okay. Like the way you use two languages, I understand like sometimes having come in once in a while, like for about 5 sentences or something, but impact do you hope to have on them by using a language they don't understand?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And even though I change things like movement in my show, I don't change the content. So using Setswana like that is to, you have the text itself performing post-coloniality. It has both languages side by side, first of all, but also it shows our culture in a way that is more complex than something that you can use a foreign language to access. So I do intend to alienate audiences for those parts and include only people who can understand the language, because that is how it is. That is how your experience will be in a constant context of being in Botswana. You won't understand everything. And I sort of go against the idea that you can take a foreign language and you could completely explain everything about Botswana. So it's that idea that I'm not trying to engage people from the first second I walk on stage to the last. There should be some things they don't understand because the humanity of Botswana is that complicated. Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your performance. I appreciate that very much. If we could just talk shop a little bit, I'm a theater person.
Yes.
There are lots of different ways to tell stories. Some Celtic storytellers, for example, present material and tell the story in a very straightforward way, perhaps with music. You've chosen to embody the characters, to represent the characters, to become very emotionally connected to the character himself. And I'd like to know what inspired that approach to your work.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. First of all, I first wrote the show. I think the first draft, when I first wrote it, it was a very direct, kind of beginning to end type of narrative. And then I thought, you know, I've never really encountered a story that is told in the structure of our traditional folk tales. The way that writers like Amaata Edu from Ghana, the way that she writes, or the way that Femi Osafishan from Nigeria writes. So I thought, why don't I use the structure that was used by our ancestors as they told the stories around the fire? And that was not necessarily a linear narrative. It was very circular. And you just always had to see, what does this symbolize, what connects with that? So it came out of that idea. And as for the emotional commitment, I think, I don't know what the alternative would be. I mean, I think that I wanted this character to be as real as I can make him, and as weak or strong as he can be. And for some reason, when I think of his weak moments, I wanted to make his vulnerability seem like bravery. He screams because he's vulnerable, not because he's in control. Things like that. So it just comes down from my, I guess, Stanislavski type of conservatory training. But I want him to be real. I don't want him to be presented as a black and white picture in history. I want to be like, I want to support your marriage. You know, I want that connection. Because we need to link the present to the past.
Stories being told from generation to generation, being passed orally, and you're trying to bring back the history to this generation.
Yes.
Have you had any what as to the authenticity of the history that you're trying to bring back?
Sorry, have I had a what?
Any request to the authenticity of the history? Because it hasn't been written. I don't know.
You're right.
I feel like there hasn't been enough written information.
You're right. And what you saw tonight, thank you for your question, what you saw tonight is a third of the whole story. So I have these 3-part series that I do. Some of them I have performed because I want to be able to defend them when I do perform them, so I don't want to make no mistakes. So I have one that is on Nkrumah. It's also 3 parts. I haven't premiered it, maybe by the end of the year. And the idea of these works not having been done before, people don't even know how to critique it. I mean, even in Botswana, people are just like, we don't know what's true, what's not true, because we've never heard it, right? that, I need to stay faithful to the facts. So what I did, before I could even draft this story, I went back to Botswana one summer, and I went to the National Archives, dug up this man's personal letters that he wrote, handwritten, the telegrams he sent to his uncle, all these video footage from the BBC, everything. I worked on that for a year before I could even write half a page about him, because I wanted to write with confidence and also with truth. So people haven't questioned it, but if they do question it, they'll be glad to know that 80% of the script is verbatim. I took liberty with shifting things around and, you know, added a couple of my things, but it's verbatim, so and I'm not worried about that. Yeah, thank you for your question.
There's a moment in your performance where you asked, do you approve of my marriage? And several people in the audience raised their hands. And I was wondering if that moment was intentionally challenging the audience to think about their faults.
That is a really good question. It's this idea of meta theater, theater that comments on the creation of theater. And I feel like this piece kind of, in a way, makes you question how theater should be created. You know, someone is like changing right in front of you and turning into character. Those are things that are supposed to be behind the scenes. But the asking the audience whether they support the marriage was a real moment that actually happened. Because the quota system, which is like the village court, works democratically like that. People have to vote. In this case, his uncle and a few of the elders did not like this marriage. And then when the people said, we support it, then that's when the woman came home, and then they're like, okay, the people want it. So it's just that kind of democracy that still characterizes Botswana's politics today. But again, I agree with you that it challenges the conventions of theater in the West. In African theater, audience interaction is not something new. Okay. Thank you so much.